what tried to break me, I healed what couldn't shake me.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the ShopTalk Therapy. I am so grateful that you've decided to spend some time with me today. If this is your first time visiting the channel, welcome. If you're returning, thank you for continuing this journey with me. This is a space where we take real conversations, real life situations, and real world events and use them to have honest discussions about mental health, emotional wellness, relationships, trauma, healing, and personal growth. Now, before we get started, I want to make something very clear. Today's episode is not about gossip. It's not about choosing sides. It's not about attacking anyone. And it's definitely not about pretending that any of us know everything that's happening behind closed doors. Instead, I want to use a conversation that has captured so much public attention, the discussions surrounding Claressa Shields, Papoose, and Remy Ma, to ask a much bigger question. What happens when we stop judging people and start asking what emotional experiences might shape the way people respond to life? Because that's what mental health teaches us. Mental health reminds us that behavior doesn't happen in a vacuum. Every person has a story. Every person has experiences. Every person has emotional wounds, disappointments, victories, losses, and moments that help shape who they are. The challenge is that social media rarely makes room for those conversations. Instead, it encourages us to become jurors. Within minutes, people decide who's the villain, who's the victim, who's right, who's wrong, who deserves grace, and who deserves criticism. But here's the reality. Life is almost never that simple. One thing I've learned both personally and professionally is that we often judge people's behavior without ever considering the emotional context surrounding it. That doesn't mean every decision someone makes is healthy. It doesn't mean people shouldn't be held accountable for their actions. But accountability and compassion can exist at the same time. Those two things are not opposites. As a mental health professional, I always try to look beneath the surface. Because when everyone else is asking, what did they do? I'm usually asking, what happened to them? Not because I'm trying to excuse harmful behavior, but because understanding the human experience helps us create healthier conversations. And honestly, I think that's something our communities desperately need, especially within the Black community, especially among Black women. Because one thing I've noticed is that Black women are often expected to survive everything. We're expected to carry everyone else's pain. We're expected to stay strong, stay composed, stay successful, stay beautiful, stay emotionally available, keep taking care of everybody else, and somehow never break. But strength doesn't mean someone isn't hurting. Strength doesn't mean someone never needs support. Strength doesn't mean someone isn't carrying invisible emotional weight. Sometimes the strongest people are carrying the heaviest burdens, and nobody realizes it because they've become so good at hiding their pain. That's why today's conversation isn't really about celebrities. It's about us. It's about the conversations happening every day in our families, our friendships, our relationships, our churches, our workplaces, and even on social media. Because if we're honest, we've all witnessed situations where people were judged long before they were understood. And that's exactly what I want us to unpack today. Not from a place of criticism, but from a place of curiosity. Because healing starts when judgment ends. So let's talk about it. Now, let's take this conversation a little deeper. One of the things that stood out to me while watching people discuss this situation online wasn't just the opinions, it was the intensity. It seemed like everyone had something to say. Some people were defending one person, others were defending someone else, and many comments quickly became personal. That's something worth paying attention to because it reflects how easily public conversations can shift from discussing actions to attacking people. I want to pause here and ask an important question. When did we become so comfortable criticizing strangers while forgetting they're still human beings? Public figures are often treated as though they don't have emotions simply because their lives are visible. But visibility doesn't erase humanity. Success doesn't eliminate vulnerability. Fame doesn't make someone immune to heartbreak, disappointment, embarrassment, or emotional pain. And that's true whether we're talking about a celebrity or someone in our own neighborhood. What concerns me even more is how often Black women find themselves at the center of harsh public criticism. Historically, Black women have been expected to be resilient no matter what life throws at them. They're often praised for being strong, but rarely given permission to be vulnerable. They're expected to carry families, careers, relationships, communities, and emotional burdens, sometimes all at once. While resilience is admirable, it can also become a burden when people assume strength means you never need support. Think about that for a moment. How many Black women have heard things like, "You'll be okay," "You're strong," or "You'll get through it," instead of hearing, "How are you really doing?" or "What do you need right now?" There's a difference between being admired for your strength and being cared for in your humanity. Sometimes people celebrate your ability to survive while overlooking the fact that you've been surviving for far too long. That's why I believe Black women need one another. Not because we have to agree on everything, not because we'll always see situations the same way, but because we understand experiences that many others may never fully understand. Supporting one another doesn't mean excusing harmful behavior. It doesn't mean ignoring accountability. It means recognizing that compassion and accountability can exist together. You can disagree with someone's choices without dehumanizing them. You can hold someone accountable without celebrating their pain. You can acknowledge hurt without adding to it. Unfortunately, social media often rewards the opposite. The loudest opinions tend to get the most attention. Outrage spreads faster than empathy. Judgment travels farther than understanding. And before long, people begin responding to headlines instead of human beings. Imagine how different our conversations would be if, instead of asking, "Who's winning or who's losing?" we asked, "What can we learn from this?" Because every highly publicized conflict offers an opportunity to reflect on our own relationships, communication, boundaries, emotional health, and support systems. Maybe that's where our focus should be. Not on tearing people down, but on building ourselves up. Not on choosing sides, but on choosing understanding. Not on fueling division, but on strengthening our communities. At the end of the day, Black women deserve spaces where they can be celebrated, challenged with love, supported through difficult seasons, and reminded that asking for help is not a weakness. It's a sign of courage. And perhaps one of the greatest ways we can support one another is by replacing judgment with empathy and creating communities where healing is valued more than humiliation. Because when one Black woman heals, the impact reaches far beyond her. It touches families, friendships, workplaces, neighborhoods, and future generations. That's the kind of conversation I hope we're building together. Now I want to shift our focus to something I believe doesn't get talked about nearly enough. When conversations like this happen, people often ask, "What's wrong with them?" As a mental health professional, I find myself asking a different question. What experiences shape the way people learn to love, trust, communicate, and cope? That's a very different conversation. One of the first things we learn in psychology is that our earliest relationships can influence how we see ourselves, other people, and the world around us. That doesn't mean our childhood determines our future, or that every challenge in adulthood is caused by childhood experiences. Human beings are far more complex than that. But early experiences can matter. For example, imagine a child who grows up in a home where love is consistent. Caregivers are emotionally available, and disagreements are handled with respect. That child may learn that relationships can be safe, communication is healthy, and conflict doesn't automatically mean abandonment. Now imagine another child whose experience is very different. Maybe there was instability. Maybe there were frequent arguments. Maybe there was emotional neglect. Maybe there were broken promises. Maybe a parent was physically present but emotionally unavailable. Maybe there were experiences with addiction, incarceration, domestic violence, community violence, or other significant stressors. Again, I'm not talking about any specific person. I'm talking about experiences that many people in our communities have lived through. When children grow up in environments where they don't consistently experience emotional safety, they often adapt in remarkable ways. Those adaptations help them survive childhood. But sometimes those same coping strategies become challenges in adulthood. A child who learned not to trust anyone may struggle to be vulnerable in relationships. A child who felt unseen may spend years searching for validation. A child who had to become independent too early may find it difficult to ask for help, even when they're overwhelmed. Someone who experienced repeated rejection may become highly sensitive to criticism or abandonment. These aren't character flaws. They're often survival strategies that developed in response to difficult circumstances. The encouraging part is that survival strategies don't have to become lifelong patterns. With self-awareness, healthy relationships, therapy, mentorship, faith, and supportive communities, people can learn new ways of responding to life. That's why I often remind people that healing isn't about pretending the past never happened. Healing is about understanding how the past may still be influencing the present and deciding that it doesn't have to control your future. Another thing I think about is how our communities sometimes misunderstand emotional pain. When someone becomes withdrawn, we may call them distant. When someone becomes defensive, we may call them difficult. When someone struggles to trust, we may call them guarded. When someone constantly tries to please everyone, we may say they're just nice. But underneath those behaviors, there may be fear, grief, insecurity, unresolved trauma, or years of learning how to survive emotionally. That doesn't mean every behavior is healthy. It doesn't mean people shouldn't take responsibility for how they treat others. It simply reminds us that behavior often has a story behind it. One of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves is curiosity. Instead of rushing to label someone, we can pause and ask, what experiences may have shaped this person? Not because we're trying to excuse harmful behavior, but because understanding creates opportunities for compassion, accountability, and growth. And here's something I want every listener to remember. No matter what your childhood looked like, your story is still being written. You are not limited by the environment you came from. You are not defined by the love you didn't receive. You are not trapped by the mistakes that were modeled for you. Healing is possible. Growth is possible. Healthy relationships are possible. The cycle can end with you. That's one of the most hopeful messages mental health has to offer. While we can't rewrite our past, we can choose how we move forward from it. As we continue this conversation, I want to introduce a concept that I believe is one of the most powerful shifts we can make, not just as individuals, but as a community. That shift is moving from survival to healing. For many people, surviving is all they've ever known. They survived difficult childhoods. They survived broken relationships. They survived financial hardship. They survived loss. They survived betrayal. They survived environments where they had to grow up too fast. And surviving deserves to be acknowledged because it takes incredible strength. But here's something I often tell people. The skills that help you survive may not be the same skills that help you build healthy relationships. Think about that. If you've spent your life believing you have to protect yourself from being hurt, opening up to someone can feel dangerous. If you've learned that people leave, trusting someone to stay can feel almost impossible. If you've spent years believing that your worth is tied to what you do for others, setting boundaries may feel selfish even though it's actually healthy. These are examples of how survival patterns can continue showing up long after the original danger has passed. And this is why healing requires more than time. You've probably heard people say, time heals all wounds. I don't necessarily believe that's true. Time passes. Healing is intentional. Healing happens when we become aware of our patterns and choose to respond differently. Healing happens when we stop asking, why am I like this? And begin asking, what can I learn about myself? Healing happens when we allow ourselves to be honest about what hurts instead of pretending we're fine. One of the biggest barriers to healing, especially in many communities, is the belief that asking for help is a sign of weakness. I want to challenge that belief today. Seeking therapy isn't weakness. Talking to a trusted mentor isn't weakness. Joining a support group isn't weakness. Learning healthier communication skills isn't weakness. Taking accountability isn't weakness. Those are all signs of emotional courage. And accountability is another word I want us to spend a moment on. Sometimes people think accountability means punishment. I see accountability differently. Accountability means taking responsibility for the impact of our actions while recognizing that we all have the capacity to grow. It's possible to say that decision caused harm, while also believing that people can learn, change, and become healthier versions of themselves. Growth and accountability are not enemies. They work together. As I reflect on the conversations surrounding Claressa Shields, Papoose, and Remy Ma, I'm reminded that we often know very little about the private lives of public figures. We see headlines, interviews, social media posts, or short video clips, but we don't have the full picture. That's why it's important to be careful about drawing conclusions or assigning motives. Instead of assuming we know someone's heart, we can use these public conversations to reflect on ourselves. How do I respond to conflict? How do I communicate when I'm hurt? Do I know how to express disappointment without causing unnecessary harm? Do I know how to apologize? Do I know how to forgive? Do I know how to set healthy boundaries? These are the questions that move us toward healing. And I also want to speak directly to Black women for just a moment. You don't have to earn rest. You don't have to prove your worth through exhaustion. You don't have to carry every burden by yourself. You don't have to pretend you're okay just because people expect you to be strong. Strength and vulnerability can exist in the same person. You can be successful and still need support. You can be accomplished and still go to therapy. You can be resilient and still cry. You can be a leader and still ask for help. None of those things make you less powerful. In fact, they make you more human. And when we begin embracing our humanity instead of hiding it, we create space for others to do the same. That's how healing spreads. One honest conversation at a time. One healthy relationship at a time. One decision to break an unhealthy cycle at a time. As we come to the end of today's conversation, I want to leave you with something that I hope stays with you long after this episode is over. Whether you've been following the conversation surrounding Claressa Shields, Papoose, and Remy Ma, or you've only heard bits and pieces of what's been circulating online, I hope today's discussion has encouraged you to look beyond the headlines. Because headlines tell us what happened. Mental health asks us to think about how people experience what happened. There's a difference. The reality is that every single one of us is carrying something. Some people are carrying childhood wounds. Some are carrying grief. Some are carrying disappointment. Some are carrying rejection. Some are carrying shame. Some are carrying trauma that no one else knows about. And some people have become so accustomed to surviving that they no longer recognize what healing even looks like. That's why I believe one of the greatest gifts we can offer another human being is compassion. Not blind agreement, not avoiding accountability, not pretending harmful behavior doesn't exist, but compassion. Compassion reminds us that every person has a story we may never fully understand. And if we want healthier relationships, healthier families, and healthier communities, We have to become people who are willing to listen before we judge. I also want to leave my Black women with this message. Your value is not determined by your relationship status. Your value is not determined by public opinion. Your value is not determined by whether people understand your journey. Your value is not determined by social media comments, gossip pages, or trending topics. Your value has always existed, long before someone applauded you, long before someone criticized you, long before someone chose you, and long before someone walked away. You deserve love that is healthy. You deserve friendships that feel safe. You deserve communities that celebrate your success instead of competing with it. You deserve spaces where you don't have to constantly prove your strength. You deserve people who check on your heart, not just your accomplishments. And perhaps most importantly, you deserve to give yourself the same grace that you so freely extend to everyone else. Because healing begins with the relationship you have with yourself. Imagine what our communities could look like if Black women intentionally supported one another. Imagine replacing comparison with collaboration, replacing criticism with conversation, replacing jealousy with celebration, replacing isolation with genuine sisterhood. Imagine what our daughters would learn if they watched women encourage each other instead of tearing each other down. Imagine what our sons would learn if they witnessed healthy communication, emotional intelligence, accountability, and mutual respect. That is how generational healing begins, not through perfection, but through intentional change. One conversation, one relationship, one family, one community at a time. And before I close, I want to challenge every person watching this episode. The next time you see a story trending online, pause. Before you comment, pause. Before you repost something, pause. Ask yourself these questions. Am I contributing to healing or am I contributing to harm? Am I responding with facts or am I reacting to emotions? If this were someone I loved, would I want the world speaking about them this way? Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is choose empathy over entertainment. Choose understanding over assumptions. Choose wisdom over outrage. Because every person deserves the opportunity to grow beyond the worst moment of their life. And that's exactly what healing is all about. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. If this conversation challenged you, encouraged you, or gave you a different perspective, I invite you to continue the discussion respectfully in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts about how we, as individuals and as a community, can better support emotional wellness while still valuing accountability and healthy relationships. If you found today's conversation meaningful, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who may need to hear this message. Together, we can normalize conversations about mental health and create spaces where healing is possible. Until next time, remember this: mental health is life health. Protect your peace, protect your purpose, protect your healing. And always remember, if it doesn't make sense, it doesn't belong in your life. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next episode.
I break what tried to break me. I heal what couldn't shake me.